Hey everybody, Dan Kent here. I want to look at a few words that basically, as we're looking at a new field of study, kind of a big part of the game is just understanding the words that are used in the field of study. And that's definitely the case with as we're studying open theism. There's a lot of words that we kind of have to familiarize ourselves with. And I want to kind of build on the last video that I shared where I looked at Calvinism, Arminianism, and open theism and kind of talk about three more words that sort of relate to that model that I shared. The three words that I want to look at are compatibilism and Molinism and process theism. The first word is compatibilism, and compatibilism relates to Calvinism or the Reformed tradition or classic theism, whatever you want to call it. It's that view of God that God has this meticulous, specific plan that he ordains for all of creation. Everything that happens, from every spin of an electron, happens exactly the way that God wants it to happen. Now, a problem emerges from that compatibilists take seriously, and that is that if everything happens the way that God wants it to happen, well, what about the things that I want? Where's my free will in this? And if I don't have free will, if I don't have say-so in this, well, then am I really responsible for my behaviors? And the compatibilists would say that no. Free will is totally compatible with this view of God's control. Now, you might look at that and say, I don't see much room there for there to be compatibility between a God who controls everything and everything happens the way that God wants it, and yet I still get to have free will. Where is the compatibility? Well, what the compatibilists would say is that it's compatible when you have the right understanding of free will. Basically, when you understand that free will is being able to do what you want to do, well, then you are free, even if God controls everything, as long as God's control doesn't compete with what you want. Or another way of saying this is that, yeah, you have free will. That is, you can do what you want to do. It's just that God gives you the wants. And God gives you the wants so that you choose and fulfill this meticulous plan that God has ordained since the foundation of the earth. And so free will is compatible with this view of a provident God as long as we understand freedom in the right way. The second word is Molinism. And Molinism emerges out of Arminianism. And basically, Molinism is just a way of understanding how God can know everything that's going to happen, even though God doesn't control everything. And so what Molinism would say is roughly God, at the foundation of the earth, before he created, God knew all logically possible worlds. And what I mean by that is it's not just that he knows logical kind of possibilities that Dan could choose or different lives that Dan could have. God actually knows all possible worlds, that is, entire zeitgeists of Dan. So, put Dan with my DNA and my temperament or whatever, you put me in like the 4th century in, say, North America. God would know all of the potential things that I could freely do and so forth. And God would also know what my tendencies would be and all of that. And so when you multiply that by all of the people that God has made, well, you see that, boy, there's a lot of potential kind of possible worlds that God could have kind of chosen, that God could have brought about. And so God knows all of these potential free choices that I'm going to make, and he knows them in all of the possible worlds that God could have put me in. And so God, before he creates, he looks at all of these potential worlds, and some of these potential worlds are acceptable, and some of them are not acceptable. And among the acceptable possible worlds, he notices that some of these are better than others. And then, ideally, maybe a handful of these worlds have a pretty darn good outcome, and out of those, maybe there's a world that is better than all of the other ones, and God chooses to actualize that world. Now, the world that God is choosing to actualize is a world where people freely do all of these things, but God just knows that it's the free choices that we make in this actualized world are the best relative to all of the other potential worlds that God could have actualized. Now, there's a lot of problems with this that we will look at, like, for instance, what does it even mean to say that God actualizes it? How can God actualize something that involves free will? That's problematic right off the bat. The third word is process theism, which is actually two words, but you get the point. Process theism did not emerge from open theism. It's a little different than the other two perspectives. Process theism really kind of ran parallel to open theism. Process theism sort of emerged from philosophy more than it did from Christian history or Christian theology. But process theism is different than open theism. They tend to be related in this sense. They both agree that process theism and open theism both agree that the future is not exhaustively settled yet. There is still possibilities that have not been actualized yet, and they remain possibilities until they are actualized. And so the future has this certain sense of openness. And so that's why open theism and process theism tend to be related, is because they share that fundamental assumption about the future. But they're very different, because process theology tends to view God and the world, or God and matter, as running eternally parallel to one another. God did not create matter out of nothing. Rather, there has always been God and there has always been matter. A lot of times the analogy is used that God and matter, or God and the universe, are sort of like the mind and the body. They're two parts of the same sort of dynamic relationship. Whereas open theism tends to emerge from theology, from the Christian history, from Christian orthodoxy, and open theism will, stick to the kind of orthodox belief that God has always been, and the universe is contingent on God. The universe is dependent on God. God created the universe and matter ex nihilo, out of nothing. God is necessary. The universe is not. There are constraints on the universe that don't apply to God. Whereas in process theism, what you'll find is that since they're both eternal and they're in this eternal relationship, both God and matter, there are constraints that are against the world, and there are constraints against God, and that's the nature of that dynamic relationship. And so in process theism, there's a lot of things that God just can't do, because God is not doesn't have like this ontological priority over matter, and so God has constraints, and there's things that God can't do. Whereas in open theism, there are things that God doesn't do, but God could do if God wanted to. So, for instance, you take free will, human free will. God chooses to withhold his say-so and his power for this greater kind of objective. Whereas in process theism, God doesn't intervene a lot of times, because God is not able to. Even if God wanted to, he couldn't. And so they're very different in that sense. Hey, I hope that was helpful. If you want to be a part of this project that I'm working on, you can join us at surprisinggod.com, and we'll have special guests. We have conversations. I think Paul Eddy is going to be joining us here pretty soon, and you can be a part of the podcast, and you support the work that I'm doing, and you support the work of these videos. So go to surprisinggod.com. You know the drill.